When God begins to move in the life of an individual who has been called, shaped, and designed for a purpose, one of the first and most unsettling actions he often takes is the removal of certain people. Many believe that divine favor is always accompanied by increase, addition, and expansion, yet God frequently protects destiny not by adding but by subtracting. The human heart is naturally drawn to familiarity, connection, and validation, so when the divine hand disrupts these relationships, the immediate reaction is confusion or even grief. But the truth is that God understands the weight of your calling more accurately than you ever can, and he sees which associations strengthen that calling and which ones threaten it. This is why God removes people to protect your purpose. It is not an act of cruelty nor a divine punishment, but a strategic realignment designed to prevent your future from being hijacked by voices, influences, or attachments that would compromise the assignment he placed within you. Yet even when God removes someone, the impulse of the soul is often to chase after what God has already ended. That chase becomes a prison of self-inflicted delay, because what God has cut off for your protection becomes dangerous if you attempt to reattach it by force. Many destinies have been wounded not by the attacks of the enemy, but by the refusal of the called person to let go of relationships God has already dismantled. When God removes someone, it is always for reasons deeper than what your eyes can recognize. You may perceive only the surface, the argument, the distance, the betrayal, the fading communication, or the unexpected exit. But God sees the unseen threads that would slowly strangle your purpose if the relationship remained intact. He sees the jealousy hidden beneath the smile, the distraction disguised as companionship, the manipulation clothed as loyalty, the stagnation covered as comfort, and the spiritual opposition concealed beneath the language of support. And because he sees those things while you do not, his intervention sometimes feels painful. Yet pain is not always a sign of harm. Sometimes it is the alarm system of heaven signaling that your destiny is under threat. God will not allow your purpose to be contaminated by the wrong environment. If the soil is toxic, the seed cannot grow. So he removes what you would have kept, protects what you would have lost, and guards what you would have surrendered. One of the most dangerous tendencies of the human heart is its nostalgia for what God has ended. Nostalgia is a trap that romanticizes what God has already dismantled. It paints yesterday with colors it never truly had, convincing you to chase ghosts instead of advancing toward destiny. When God ends a relationship, a partnership, a friendship, or even a connection you treasured, he does not ask you to understand it immediately. He asks you to trust him. Trust is the currency of purpose. Without trust, you will constantly sabotage your own journey by attempting to rebuild what God has already demolished for your protection. Many have stayed in cycles far too long because they refuse to interpret divine removal as divine mercy. What you call abandonment may actually be God's rescue. What you call loss may actually be God's shielding. What you call rejection may actually be God's direction. God removes people because everyone in your life carries influence. And influence shapes direction. The wrong influence, even if wrapped in affection, can misalign your purpose by degrees so subtle that you do not notice the drift until you are miles away from the path God set for you. In Scripture, every destiny required separation before activation. Abraham had to separate from his father's house before God could show him the land of promise. Joseph had to be separated from his brothers to fulfill a dream they could not handle. David had to be separated from Saul before the throne could be prepared. Jesus had to separate himself from the crowds to maintain clarity of purpose. Paul had to separate from old alliances to walk in apostolic authority. Destiny demands separation. You cannot carry everyone into the next season. The next room has a different atmosphere, and not every person can breathe at the altitude of your assignment. God removes people because he knows who can survive the elevation of your destiny and who will suffocate in it. The tragedy is that many people try to drag old relationships into new seasons, unaware that what was once supportive becomes destructive when moved outside its divine timeline. Relationships have expiration dates when tied to destiny. They do not expire because the individuals are evil, but because the season of purpose connected to that relationship has fulfilled its role, When the assignment of that relationship ends, the grace for it ends as well. Continuing beyond that point produces strain, conflict, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. You begin to sense that something no longer fits, but instead of seeking God for understanding, you try to force harmony where God has already removed grace. Anything forced becomes a burden. Anything God ends, but you continue becomes an idol. God will never bless an idol you build from a relationship he dismantled. Many people underestimate how much protection is hidden in divine removal. Sometimes God removes someone because their presence would distort your identity. You might begin to accept a version of yourself shaped by their expectations rather than God's design. Sometimes God removes someone because their voice would eventually outweigh his voice in your heart. Sometimes he removes someone because their insecurity would sabotage your growth. Sometimes he removes someone because their secret resentment would erupt at the moment of your elevation. Sometimes he removes someone because their hidden sin would contaminate your testimony. Sometimes he removes someone because their private battles would become public obstacles for your future. And sometimes God removes someone simply because they cannot go where he is taking you. Purpose requires alignment. Aligning with the wrong people produces misalignment with God. When God removes someone and you chase after them, you place yourself in opposition to the divine strategy assigned to protect you. God is not obligated to protect what you rebuild without his permission. This is why many people experience cycles of heartbreak, disappointment, betrayal, and emotional collapse. They are trying to resurrect what God crucified. Divine removal is not a suggestion, it is a protective decree. When you ignore it, you invite unnecessary warfare. Some of the battles you are fighting are not from the enemy, but from disobedience. You reattached yourself to something God detached you from, and now you are carrying the weight of a relationship that no longer has divine covering. Another reason God removes people is because purpose grows in environments of clarity. Confusion delays destiny, and people who cloud your focus become obstacles to purpose. If someone's presence consistently introduces doubt, distraction, temptation, emotional instability, or spiritual compromise, God will remove them. Not because he does not love them, but because he loves you enough to guard what he placed in you. Your purpose is not a casual accessory. It is heaven's investment. And God protects his investments. He will not allow someone to pull you away from the pathway he ordained when he formed you in the secret place. Purpose is sacred. The people connected to it must be chosen carefully, and God sometimes makes those choices for you by removing those who are not assigned to your future. When divine removal occurs, the mature response is surrender, not resistance. Surrender does not mean you do not feel the loss. It means you trust God more than you trust your own emotional attachments. Feelings are real, but they are not always reliable guides for purpose. Purpose requires discernment, and discernment requires listening. If you constantly fight God's decisions, you cannot hear his instructions. Many are praying for new direction while clinging to old relationships that block their spiritual perception. You cannot hear God clearly when your heart is still echoing with the voices he silenced. Silence is sometimes the first sign of separation. When a voice fades, when a connection weakens, when a bond dissolves without clear explanation, your first question should not be, "What did I do wrong?" But God, what are you protecting? Divine removal is also a test of identity. If your identity is rooted in relationships rather than in God, removal will feel like personal failure. But removal is not always about you. Sometimes it is about the clarity God is producing within you. He removes people so you discover who you are without their opinions, expectations, or limitations. You cannot step into your purpose while wearing identities loaned to you by people who were never meant to define you. God removes people to reveal your authentic self. Some relationships shield you from parts of you that need to emerge. As long as you remain under the shadow of their voice, you cannot hear your true calling. God removes them so you can rise. There is also a spiritual dimension to divine removal that many overlook. In the unseen realm, connections become conduits. People either amplify what God placed within you or drain it. They either sharpen your spiritual senses or dull them. They either protect your anointing or expose it to danger. Some individuals are spiritual liabilities. They may look supportive outwardly, but spiritually they carry atmospheres that conflict with your assignment. The enemy strategically uses relationships to infiltrate destiny. God, in His mercy, cuts these ties before they produce irreversible damage. You may weep over the separation, but heaven rejoices because your future has been secured. When God removes someone, He is not only protecting your purpose, but preparing your future. Some people must exit before the right people can enter. Your destiny connections cannot find you while your life is overcrowded with relationships God did not authorize. Divine removal creates space. It creates emotional space, spiritual space, mental space, and relational space for the people who will push, support, and strengthen your calling. As long as you cling to what God ended, you block what God wants to begin. The next chapter cannot open while you keep rereading the last one. God removes people not just to protect who you are now, but to prepare who you are becoming. The removal of people is also an invitation to maturity. Children cling, the mature release. Children cry when something is taken, the mature discern why it was removed. God is raising you to a level where your emotional responses no longer dictate your spiritual obedience. Purpose cannot be fulfilled through emotional immaturity. At times, God will remove people simply to grow your capacity to trust Him beyond your feelings. Trust is forged in moments of loss. You learn who God truly is when you lose who you thought you needed. Every removal deepens your dependence on God and strengthens your resilience. Another dimension of divine removal is timing. Some people are not wrong. They are simply wrong for this season. Purpose unfolds in stages, and relationships are assigned to seasons. When a season shifts, God may remove someone temporarily or permanently. Whether temporary or final, the removal is still strategic. The key is not to chase force or interfere. When you interfere with divine timing, you disrupt divine order. Purpose thrives in order. If your relationships are out of divine order, your purpose will suffer instability. When God removes people to protect your purpose, He is also teaching you the difference between covenant and assignment. Covenant relationships are lifelong. Assignment relationships are seasonal. Many confuse the two. You try to give lifelong loyalty to people who are only meant to walk with you for a chapter, not the entire story. When the assignment ends, the relationship dissolves. Understanding this difference prevents heartbreak and empowers obedience. You begin to release people with gratitude instead of resentment. You honor the season they served without forcing them into seasons they are not anointed to enter. Divine removal also exposes your source. If a relationship was your source of validation, comfort, or security, God may remove it to reveal that He alone is your source. Purpose demands that your foundation be rooted in God, not in people. People are channels, not foundations. When God removes a channel, He is redirecting the flow, not stopping it. He is cleansing your dependence so that nothing competes with His lordship in your life. Finally, God removes people because your destiny requires purity of focus. Purpose is not fulfilled accidentally. It requires intentional alignment. Every person in your life either accelerates or delays your purpose. God removes those who would delay you, distract you, diminish you, or divide you from the path He ordained. Even if you cannot understand it in the moment, divine removal is always an act of love. God is committed to your destiny more than you are. And because He is committed, He will not allow anything or anyone to interfere with the purpose He entrusted to you. Every divine separation carries an instruction, but most people never hear it because they are too focused on the emotional noise of the loss, rather than the spiritual message hidden within it. Whenever God interrupts a relationship, a partnership, or a connection, heaven is not merely closing a door. Heaven is speaking. God never removes without revealing. He never subtracts without signaling. He never disconnects without directing. But if you only interpret separation through human logic, you will miss the divine instruction embedded within it. Many people pray for clarity while ignoring the very moments God uses to communicate it. The absence of a person is often the presence of a message. Yet when emotions dominate, revelation becomes muffled. Divine separation is God's way of reshaping your direction by adjusting your circle. The people around you do not simply influence your emotions, they influence your discernment, your decisions, your spiritual atmosphere, and ultimately your obedience. So when God separates, He is teaching, He is instructing, He is redirecting your focus to what you could not see while the relationship remained intact. Every separation, whether gentle, abrupt, confusing, or painful, is a form of divine education. God is revealing something about Himself, something about you, something about them, or something about your future. But you must not chase what God dismissed, because doing so blinds you to the instruction that the separation was designed to impart. When God ends a connection, there is always something He wants you to understand about your identity. Some relationships keep you functioning below your calling, adjusting your voice to fit their comfort, shrinking your potential to avoid their insecurity, or compromising your convictions to maintain peace. When God separates you from such voices, He is reminding you of who you are. He is calling you back to the blueprint of your design, the architecture of your purpose, the uncompromised version of your identity. The instruction hidden in that separation is simple. Stop modifying yourself to accommodate assignments that have already expired. Sometimes the instruction within separation is about discernment. God allows certain people to leave so that you can finally see what you ignored while they were present. Their exit reveals motives that their presence concealed. It uncovers attitudes, loyalties, dependencies, or spiritual influences that were not visible to you before. God teaches you how to discern more quickly, how to observe patterns rather than excuses, how to identify environments that drain your purpose, and how to hear His voice without relying on the validation of others. This instruction equips you for the next level, where discernment becomes essential for survival. Other times the instruction is about direction. God uses separation to redirect your steps toward assignments you would have neglected if the connection remained intact. Some people anchor you to old seasons, not because they are evil, but because your bond with them kept your focus locked on a place God was trying to move you away from. When He removes them, it is not an interruption, it is a recalibration. The instruction becomes clear: your future is not behind you, and neither is your purpose. What left is not where you are going. There are moments when the instruction is about dependence. Some relationships become crutches that replace God. You depend on their advice more than His voice, their approval more than His affirmation, their presence more than His guidance. When God strips away that connection, He is teaching you to lean on Him again. He is reclaiming His position as your source, your counsel, your strength. The instruction is not punishment, it is alignment. God is restoring the order of your faith so that no human relationship becomes an idol that competes with His leadership in your life. Divine separation also carries instruction about boundaries. Some people remain in your life longer than they should because you have not yet learned how to establish borders that protect your spiritual, emotional, and mental health. Their exit becomes the lesson you refused to learn while they were present. God uses their departure to show you where your boundaries were weak, where your compassion was exploited, where your loyalty was misplaced, and where your generosity was mismanaged. The instruction teaches you how to guard your heart while still walking in love, how to be kind without becoming exhausted, and how to give without becoming drained. Often, the instruction within separation is about acceleration. God removes people who slow your pace, delay your decisions, dilute your focus, or distract your energy. They may not sabotage you intentionally, but their presence keeps you locked into a rhythm beneath your potential. When God removes them, your momentum increases. You begin to think clearer, move faster, hear better, and grow stronger. The instruction is that purpose does not tolerate delay. What God is doing in your life requires movement, and not everyone can move with you. There are other times when the instruction is about healing. Some relationships stay alive because you are feeding them with broken places they were never meant to occupy. Their presence numbs you, distracts you, or gives you comfort that masks wounds God wants to address. When God removes them, the discomfort exposes the need for healing. Though separation feels painful at first, the instruction is restorative. God is teaching you how to let Him mend what you tried to fix through human attachment. Another instruction embedded in separation is vision. As long as certain people remain in your life, your vision remains blurred. Their perspectives cloud your thinking, their limitations shape your expectations, their negativity contaminates your imagination. When God removes them, suddenly you can see again. You see possibilities, opportunities, dreams, and strategies that were invisible before. The instruction becomes clear. Not everyone deserves access to the lens through which God shows you your future. Divine separation also carries instruction about trust. When someone exits your life unexpectedly, you learn whether your faith rests in stability or in God. You learn whether your peace is anchored in circumstances or in His sovereignty. You learn whether you trust His timing or only His blessings. The instruction refines your faith, stripping away assumptions about how God must work and revealing that His ways, even when painful, are purposeful. But the most ignored instruction within separation is simply this: let it be. Do not chase, do not negotiate, do not revive, do not force. You start pursuing what God dismissed. You step outside the curriculum of heaven. You interrupt the lesson. You distort the message. You silence the instruction. Many people never grow spiritually because they are too busy trying to reclaim relationships God used as classrooms. They are repeating spiritual grades because they refuse to accept the divine message written in the departure of a person. When you chase what God ended, you demonstrate that your attachment is stronger than your obedience. When separation comes, your responsibility is to listen, quiet your emotions long enough to hear the whisper beneath the noise. Ask God what He is revealing, not whom you should beg to stay. Every separation is a doorway to revelation. Every disconnection is a divine conversation. Every ending carries instruction. If you learn to hear the voice of God in what leaves your life, you will never again fear separation, because you will know that with every removal, heaven is teaching you how to walk deeper into your purpose without carrying weights that were never part of your destiny. Purpose requires pruning, and pruning always feels like loss before it reveals growth. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in the journey of destiny, because people often assume that purpose unfolds through addition, recognition, or visible progress. Yet in the kingdom, progress often begins with subtraction. God does not prune because He is taking something from you. He prunes because He is making room within you. He is refining your capacity so you can hold the weight of the assignment He placed on your life. But pruning rarely feels spiritual. It feels like loss, separation, disappointment, betrayal, or disruption. It feels like God is cutting branches you thought were necessary for your identity, your stability, or your relationships. But pruning is God's way of removing what would hinder your growth, even if it looks healthy externally. God cuts what is comfortable to protect what is called. Purpose cannot flourish in overcrowded soil. When there are too many attachments, too many emotional cords, too many obligations that God did not ordain, your growth becomes restricted. You cannot rise if you are entangled. You cannot move freely toward your assignment when your heart is tethered to distractions that consume your energy and dilute your focus. So God begins to prune. He removes voices that drain you. He cuts ties that limit you. He ends cycles that slow you. He exposes patterns that weaken you. At first, you interpret this as loss because you feel the sharpness of the divine blade before you see the fruit of the divine intention. But in the economy of heaven, loss is often the doorway to expansion. God subtracts before He multiplies. He empties before He fills. He breaks before He builds. The hand that cuts is the same hand that cultivates, and the pain you feel is not destruction but preparation. The challenge is that pruning contradicts human instinct. When you sense something being taken from you, your immediate reaction is to cling tighter. You try to save what God is removing. You attempt to hold together what God is dismantling. You try to nourish branches God has already judged unfruitful. But the longer you cling to what God is cutting, the longer you delay the growth He intends to produce in you. Pruning is an act of divine mercy, even when it looks like divine disruption. God is not trying to break your life apart. He is trying to break you free from everything that cannot go with you into the next phase of your purpose. Every branch that remains unpruned becomes a future hindrance, and every branch God removes frees the flow of purpose within you. Much of what God cuts in pruning is internal, not external. He cuts attitudes that sabotage destiny. He trims habits that weaken discipline. He removes beliefs that conflict with your identity. He challenges mindsets that hold you hostage to past versions of yourself. He exposes insecurities that create dependency on the wrong people. He uproots fears that keep you from embracing new opportunities. The pruning inside you is often more painful than the pruning around you, because internal pruning confronts parts of you that you have carried for years. You feel the loss of what was familiar, even if it was limiting you. But God will not allow internal clutter to corrupt the blueprint of your calling. He prunes your character so your purpose does not collapse under the weight of immaturity. Pruning is also God's way of protecting your future self from your current self. There are patterns in you that may not seem harmful now, but would derail you later. There are behaviors you tolerate in small seasons that would destroy you in larger ones. There are habits that feel manageable at your present level, but would be disastrous at your next level. So God cuts them early. He disciplines you now to preserve you later. You may not understand why certain doors close, why certain opportunities vanish, why certain relationships end, why certain environments no longer fit. But pruning is always about longevity. God wants you to endure, not merely begin. He is preparing you for sustained purpose, not momentary success. One of the hardest parts of pruning is that it often happens in silence. God does not always explain what He is cutting or why He is cutting it. He simply begins the process, and you are left with questions, confusion, or emotional discomfort. But silence is not absence. Silence is strategy. In the silence, God is giving your spirit space to adjust to the weight of transformation. If He explained every cut, you might resist it. If He justified every separation, you might argue with Him. If He showed you every future danger, you might not believe Him. So He prunes quietly, trusting that your obedience will mature, even if your understanding lags behind. The silence of pruning is the training ground of trust. You learn to trust His hand even when you cannot trace His logic. Pruning also exposes what you value. When God cuts something from your life, your reaction reveals whether you value comfort more than calling, attachment more than assignment, or familiarity more than obedience. Some people are more committed to what is comfortable than to what is fruitful. They cling to what feels safe even if it is suffocating their purpose. But pruning forces a choice. Will you cling to what was or yield to what God is creating? Will you prioritize relationships that drain you or surrender to the ones that align with your destiny? Will you protect habits that give you momentary relief or allow God to shape habits that produce long-term growth? Purpose requires the courage to let God cut what you would have kept. Pruning is also a test of your willingness to grow. Many claim they want purpose, but purpose demands sacrifice. It demands letting go. It demands surrender. It demands discipline. Growth is impossible without pruning because pruning removes everything that steals nutrients from your destiny. Some people, some habits, some decisions, and some desires are nutrient thieves. They drain your spiritual energy, your emotional strength, your mental clarity, and your time. God cuts them so the nutrients of your life, your focus, your creativity, your strength, your passion, can be redirected toward what will bear fruit. Without pruning, your purpose becomes scattered. With pruning, your purpose becomes concentrated. Another dimension of pruning is that it isolates before it elevates. Most people misunderstand this stage. They think isolation means rejection, abandonment, or failure. But isolation is the greenhouse of destiny. When God isolates you, He is not hiding you, He is preparing you. He is giving you the environment needed for accelerated growth. He is freeing you from voices that distract, opinions that distort, and influences that dilute your identity. You cannot grow deeply while constantly surrounded by noise. You cannot hear God clearly if you are constantly absorbing the expectations of others. So God brings you into a private season, a hidden season, a season where He trims, shapes, and strengthens the deepest parts of you. Isolation is not punishment, it is construction. Pruning also reveals the difference between activity and productivity. Not everything that looks busy is fruitful. Not every connection that looks supportive is aligned. Not every opportunity that looks promising is God ordained. Many branches in your life may look full, but bear no fruit. They take your time, your focus, your strength, and your energy, yet produce nothing that advances your calling. God cuts these branches to shift you from business to fruitfulness. He is not interested in how much you are doing. He is interested in how much of what you are doing fulfills your assignment. Pruning eliminates the distractions of activity so you can focus on the obedience that produces destiny. The pain of pruning often makes people believe they are losing more than they are gaining. But what you perceive as loss is actually God clearing the path for increase. He is removing the unnecessary so the essential can flourish. He is cutting the temporary so the eternal can grow. He is stripping away what is shallow so what is deep can take root. Growth is uncomfortable because it requires the death of what is no longer serving you. And until you learn to embrace the discomfort of pruning, you will resist the very process designed to elevate you. The beauty of pruning is that although it begins with loss, it ends with fruit. Though it starts with cutting, it produces abundance. What God removes in one season, He replaces with increase in the next. But you cannot experience the increase if you refuse the cut. Many people pray for fruit but reject the pruning. They want destiny without sacrifice, purpose without discipline, growth without loss. But in the kingdom, fruit is always the reward of pruning. The more you allow God to cut, the more room you create for what is truly meant for your life. Pruning is proof that God sees something in you worth cultivating. It means He believes you are capable of more, ready for more, destined for more. And because He knows the fullness of your potential, He refuses to let anything hinder the fruit He designed you to produce. Stop negotiating with seasons God has already closed. Alignment is the price of destiny. One of the greatest dangers to a person called by God is the temptation to bargain with what God has already ended. Divine decisions are not open for a negotiation. When God closes a door, the only safe response is obedience. But the human heart, driven by emotion, nostalgia, and fear of the unknown, often tries to reopen what heaven has sealed shut. We try to revive expired seasons, resurrect dead relationships, revisit old environments, and reclaim what God removed for our protection. Every act of negotiation with a closed season becomes an act of rebellion against your own future. Destiny cannot unfold where disobedience is allowed to negotiate its terms. God never closes a season without purpose. When He ends something, it is because its assignment in your life is complete. That relationship served its purpose. That environment fulfilled its season. That opportunity accomplished its role. That chapter reached its divine expiration. But humans struggle with finality. We cling to old comfort, familiar cycles, and predictable patterns, believing that safety lies in what is known rather than in what is next. But the journey of purpose is never backward. The rear view mirror is not your prophetic direction. When you negotiate with closed seasons, you tie your future to a past God is no longer speaking through. Every destiny has a rhythm. Every assignment has divine timing. When you refuse to align with God's timing, you create delays that heaven never authored. Many people blame the enemy for warfare that is actually the result of lingering in places God has departed from. When God moves and you stay, you create a spiritual vacuum, an empty space where you are exposed, vulnerable, and misaligned. Alignment is not optional. Alignment is survival. The safest place for a person of destiny is inside the will of God, not near it, not around it, not close to it, inside it. Misalignment may feel comfortable at first, but it becomes costly in the long run. Every day spent negotiating with a closed season is a day stolen from your purpose. God closes seasons to shift your identity. Every season shapes you differently. When a season is over, the version of you formed in that season has already served its function. Trying to stay in a closed season forces you into an outdated identity. You continue to function as who you were, not who you are becoming. Closed seasons become prisons when you refuse to evolve. Clinging to old seasons keeps you emotionally connected to outdated relationships, mentally attached to expired dreams, and spiritually tied to places where you no longer carry grace. The danger is not simply missing the next season. The danger is becoming a version of yourself God never intended to sustain. When you negotiate with a closed season, you create counterfeits. A heart unwilling to release what God ended will always manufacture replacements, relationships that feel right but are wrong, opportunities that look divine but dilute your purpose, doors that open but lead nowhere. Counterfeit seasons feel familiar because they mimic the atmosphere of what God ended, but they carry none of the grace. This is why so many people feel spiritually exhausted. They are living in seasons they created, not seasons God ordained. Without alignment, even blessings feel burdensome. Even opportunities feel heavy. Even relationships feel draining. Alignment makes everything flow. Misalignment makes everything fight you. One of the clearest signs that a season is closed is when peace has exited, not the peace of comfort, but the peace of clarity. You suddenly feel unrest, a holy discomfort, a spiritual uneasiness that refuses to let you settle. That is God's warning system alerting you that the grace for that season is gone. When grace leaves, the season ends. When you ignore the absence of grace and continue anyway, you begin to feel the weight of carrying something heaven is no longer supporting. Many people interpret this weight as spiritual attack when in reality it is simply the consequence of staying too long. Another sign a season is closed is the stagnation of growth. Nothing moves. Nothing progresses, nothing shifts. You are working harder but accomplishing less. You are investing more but receiving nothing of value in return. You feel drained, stretched, and depleted because you are pouring into a place that has no capacity to nourish you anymore. Growth is always a mark of divine presence. When growth stops, it is usually because God has already moved to the next season, waiting for you to catch up. One of the most dangerous but overlooked signs of a closed season is when God starts removing support systems that once held you up. People who once encouraged you suddenly drift. Opportunities that opened easily now resist you. Provision that came smoothly becomes strained. Doors that once swung open now feel locked. This is not the devil, this is direction. God removes the scaffolding of a season when the building is complete. If he left the scaffolding intact, you would keep climbing what was never meant to take you higher. Divine removal is divine transition. There is also a deeper truth many refuse to confront. Sometimes God closes a season because what you want and what he wants are no longer aligned. He closes the season to protect you from your own desires. Not everything you want is healthy for your purpose. Not everything that feels right is fruitful. Not everything that makes you happy makes you holy. God closes seasons not to deprive you, but to preserve you. The heart is deceptive, and without divine interruption, it will lead you into futures never designed for your destiny. Refusing to move on from closed seasons creates spiritual decay. Dreams rot when kept in environments no longer graced. Purpose suffocates under the weight of outdated attachments. Calling becomes confused when surrounded by people who cannot speak into who you are becoming. Staying in a closed season is not just disobedience, it is self-sabotage. Clinging to what God ended slowly kills the potential he placed within you. Alignment is costly, it requires surrender, it demands obedience. It insists you let go of everything God is no longer using. But alignment also carries authority. When your life is aligned with heaven, doors open without force. Favor flows without striving. Relationships strengthen you rather than drain you. Resources find you instead of you chasing them. Alignment makes your life prophetic, powerful, and purposeful. But here is the shocking truth most avoid. God is not waiting on your enemies. God is not waiting on your circumstances. God is not waiting on the world around you. God is waiting on you to leave the season he already closed. Heaven is prepared. The next chapter is written. The doors are ready. The opportunities are positioned. The relationships are appointed. The purpose is matured, but none of it will manifest until you stop trying to resurrect what God has already buried. And here is the punch that must shake your spirit awake. Every time you keep a closed season alive, you delay the version of you God intended to unveil. Every time you revisit what God ended, you become an enemy to your own destiny. Every time you chase what God closed, you choose bondage over breakthrough. So the most dangerous question you must confront is not, what is the enemy doing? The most dangerous question is, how much longer will you stay in a season God already left? And the most shocking truth of all, your future is not waiting on a miracle, your future is waiting on your exit.